All this time, I was the rich one.
The eviction notice felt like sandpaper between my fingers as I stood in the doorway of what used to be my home. 3 months behind on the mortgage thanks to the divorce settlement that left me with nothing but debt and a bruised ego. My ex-wife Sarah had moved on to bigger and better things, specifically a penthouse in Manhattan with her new husband, real estate mogul Richard Blackstone. Dad, do we really have to move to Grandma's old place? My 14-year-old daughter Emma wrinkled her nose as she surveyed the boxes scattered across our living room floor. It's temporary, sweetheart. I tried to sound more confident than I felt. Just until I get back on my feet. My 10-year-old son Jake was already adapting, as kids do. Will there be a basement? Tommy's house has a basement where we can play video games. There's an attic, I said, remembering my childhood explorations in my late mother's house on Long Island. Might be even better than a basement. The truth was, I hadn't been back to that house since Mom's funeral 2 years ago. My Uncle Frank had been handling the property taxes and maintenance, claiming the place was worthless and would probably need to be sold for scrap. But it was shelter, and shelter was what we needed. Sarah's voice echoed in my memory from our last custody hearing. David, you need to understand that the children deserve stability. Richard can provide that. Well, you're still figuring things out, aren't you? The judge had been sympathetic but practical. Weekend custody for me, primary residence with their mother and stepfather. The kids would attend elite private schools, live in luxury, and have access to opportunities I could never provide on my engineering consultant's income. What was left of it after the legal fees? 2 days later, we pulled into the gravel driveway of 847 Maple Street in Hicksville, Long Island. The house looked smaller than I remembered. Its white paint peeling and the front porch sagging slightly under the weight of neglect. But it was solid, built in 1952 by my grandfather's construction crew. They knew how to build things to last back then. It's kind of spooky, Emma observed, clutching her phone like a lifeline. It's got character, I countered, fishing the keys from my pocket. Your great-grandfather built this place with his own hands. The interior smelled of dust and mothballs, but underneath that was the familiar scent of my childhood. My mother's lavender sachets and the lingering aroma of her Sunday pot roasts. Frank had done a decent job maintaining the basics: electricity, plumbing, heat. The furniture was still covered in white sheets, giving the living room a ghostly appearance. Can we order pizza? Jake asked, ever practical. Absolutely. Let's get settled first. It took 3 trips to unload the U-Haul, and by evening we had managed to make the place feel somewhat livable. The kids claimed bedrooms on the 2nd floor while I took my old room at the back of the house. As they settled in with their devices and a large pepperoni pizza, I found myself drawn to the narrow stairs leading to the attic. The pull chain light still worked, casting harsh shadows across the sloped ceiling and exposed rafters. Boxes and furniture covered in decades of dust created a maze of memories. I could see my old bicycle in the corner, my mother's sewing machine, and stacks of photo albums that would need sorting someday. But it was the metal filing cabinet in the far corner that caught my attention. I didn't remember it from childhood explorations, and it looked more official than the usual attic storage. The lock was simple, and I found a screwdriver in my grandfather's old toolbox. Inside the top drawer were documents I'd never seen before: property deeds, stock certificates, and business incorporation papers, all bearing the name David Michael Patterson, my name. The dates went back decades, some predating my birth. My hands shook as I pulled out a leather portfolio tied with string. Inside was a will dated just 6 months before my grandfather's end, along with a handwritten letter addressed to me. David, the letter began in my grandfather's careful script. If you're reading this, then the vultures have probably convinced you that you're poor. Don't believe them. You own everything I built, including the company, the properties, and the investments. Your Uncle Frank and your mother have been managing things, but they were supposed to tell you the truth when you turn 30. If they haven't, it's because they've been helping themselves to what's rightfully yours. The room seemed to spin as I read further. Patterson Construction Company, which I thought it had been sold after Grandpa's end, was still operating. The family home in Hicksville was just one of 12 properties I apparently owned across Long Island and Queens. There were stock portfolios, municipal bonds, and a business that had been generating income for years. According to the documents, I was worth somewhere north of $8 million. Dad? Emma's voice drifted up from downstairs. The Wi-Fi password isn't working. Coming! I called back, my voice cracking slightly. I carefully gathered the documents and locked them in the filing cabinet. My mind was racing, trying to process what I'd discovered. Uncle Frank had been sending me Christmas cards for years, always mentioning how tough things were, how the family business had gone under, how he was barely scraping by on Social Security. My mother had died believing we were just getting by on her teacher's pension. But if these documents were genuine, they'd been living off my inheritance while I struggled through a divorce that left me nearly bankrupt. More importantly, Sarah had known. She had to have known. Her sudden interest in divorce, her quick remarriage to Richard, her insistence on taking the kids to a better life, it all made sense now. She hadn't been leaving a failure. She'd been positioning herself to benefit from what she thought would be my eventual windfall. Except she'd jumped ship too early. I spent the next hour researching property records online, cross-referencing the documents with public information. Everything checked out. Patterson Construction was listed as an active corporation with offices in Mineola. The properties were all legitimate, all generating rental income that had been flowing into accounts I didn't even know existed. My phone buzzed with a text from Sarah. Kids need their school clothes by Monday. Richard's driver can pick them up Sunday evening. Don't make them late for their first day at Whitmore Academy. Whitmore Academy, $50,000 a year per child, according to their website. Richard was footing the bill, earning him hero status with Emma and Jake while I counted quarters for laundry money. I typed back, actually, I think we need to talk, all of us, tomorrow at 2 p.m. Her response came quickly. David, if this is about the custody arrangement, my lawyer says, it's not about custody. It's about the kid's inheritance. Bring Richard. You're both going to want to hear this. The typing indicator appeared and disappeared several times before she responded, what inheritance? I smiled for the first time in months. See you at 2. I spent Saturday morning at the offices of Patterson Construction in Mineola, a modest 2-story building that I apparently owned. The receptionist, a pleasant woman in her 50s named Carol, seemed genuinely shocked when I introduced myself. Mr. Patterson, oh my goodness, we've been wondering when you'd come by. Your Uncle Frank said you were going through a difficult time and didn't want to be bothered with business matters. Frank's been handling things? Well, yes, he's been signing the checks and making decisions. But we all knew he was just keeping things running until you were ready to take over. She paused, studying my face. You do know about the company, don't you? I'm learning. Could you show me the books? What I discovered over the next 2 hours was both infuriating and enlightening. Patterson Construction had been thriving under the management of a competent foreman named Pete Kowalski, who'd worked for my grandfather for 30 years. The company specialized in municipal contracts and had a reputation for quality work and fair pricing. Uncle Frank had indeed been signing checks, paying himself a salary of $180,000 per year as interim president, plus bonuses and expense accounts. He'd also been funneling money to my late mother, ostensibly for family support, though she'd never mentioned receiving anything beyond her pension. Frank said you weren't interested in the construction business, Pete explained when I met with him. Said you were too educated for getting your hands dirty. But your grandfather always talked about you taking over someday. What's the company worth? Pete whistled low. With our contracts and equipment? Maybe $4 million, give or take. We've got steady work lined up through next year, and the city's been talking about a big infrastructure project that could keep us busy for the next decade. I thanked Pete and promised to be in touch soon. Then I drove back to Hicksville to prepare for the most important performance of my life. Sarah arrived at exactly 2 p.m. in Richard's black Mercedes, the same car she'd been photographed in for the society pages of several local magazines. She looked stunning, as always, her blonde hair perfectly styled, wearing a designer dress that probably cost more than my monthly rent used to be. Richard stepped out of the driver's side, and I had to admit he looked the part of a successful businessman, tall, silver-haired, with the kind of confident bearing that came from never having to check your bank balance before making a purchase. David, Sarah said coolly as they approached the front door. The children aren't here. They're at the neighbor's house. I thought we should talk privately first. Richard extended his hand. Good to finally meet you properly, David. Sarah's told me a lot about you. I'll bet she has, I thought, but I shook his hand and invited them inside. The living room looked shabby compared to what they were used to, but I'd removed the dust covers and done my best to make it presentable. I offered coffee, which they declined, and we settled into an awkward triangle on my mother's old furniture. So, Sarah began, what's this about an inheritance? Your mother didn't leave much, did she? This isn't about my mother's estate. It's about my grandfather's. Richard leaned forward slightly. I thought that was settled years ago. So did I. Turns out we were all misinformed. I pulled out copies of the documents I'd found, spreading them across the coffee table. It seems I've been the owner of Patterson Construction and a substantial real estate portfolio for the past 15 years. I just didn't know it. The color drained from Sarah's face as she picked up the will. Richard was scanning the property deeds, his businessman's eye quickly calculating values. This can't be right, Sarah whispered. Frank said, your mother said, Frank and my mother have been managing my assets and helping themselves to the profits. About $3 million worth over the past decade, by my rough calculation. Richard set down the papers and looked at me with new interest. These documents appear genuine. Have you had them authenticated? I spent the morning at the company offices. Everything checks out. I own a construction business worth about $4 million, plus properties generating roughly $40,000 a month in rental income. Sarah was staring at me as if I'd grown a second head. You're saying you've been rich this whole time? I'm saying I've been stolen from this whole time. The question is, what did you know about it? Nothing. David, I swear I had no idea. Frank always said your grandfather lost everything in bad investments. But Richard was studying the dates on the documents, and I could see the wheels turning. Sarah, didn't you mention that Frank approached you during the divorce proceedings? Something about David's future prospects? Sarah's face went from pale to red. He might have mentioned that you had some family money coming eventually. But he said it was years away, and there were no guarantees. So you did know. I knew there might be something someday. But David, you have to understand we were living paycheck to paycheck. The kids needed stability, and Richard could provide that immediately. While you waited for my inheritance to kick in. Richard cleared his throat. David, I think there might be some misunderstanding here. Sarah married me because we fell in love, not for financial reasons. I almost laughed. Richard, with all due respect, you've been married twice before. Both times to women significantly younger than you. Both marriages ending when your wives received substantial settlements. Sarah fits the pattern perfectly, except she thought she was trading up from a poor ex-husband to a rich one, with the bonus of my family money coming later. That's not true. Sarah stood up, her composure finally cracking. You think you can just waltz back into our lives with some dusty papers and rewrite history? The kids are happy with Richard. They have opportunities you could never give them. Actually, I can give them quite a lot now, starting with college funds that don't depend on their stepfather's generosity. Richard remained seated, but I could see him processing the implications. What exactly are you proposing, David? I'm not proposing anything. I'm informing you both that circumstances have changed. The kids' financial future is secure, and I'll be taking a more active role in their lives. Sarah was pacing now, her designer heels clicking on the hardwood floor. You can't just upend everything because you found some old documents. The custody arrangement is settled. The kids are enrolled in school. The custody arrangement was based on my inability to provide for them adequately. That's no longer an issue. Money isn't everything, David. Richard has been a father to them. For 6 months. I've been their father for 14 years. Richard finally stood, placing a calming hand on Sarah's shoulder. Perhaps we should all take some time to process this information. David, if these assets are legitimate, then congratulations. But let's not make any hasty decisions about the children's living situation. I nodded, appearing reasonable. Of course, I just wanted you both to understand that things are going to be different going forward. After they left, I sat in the quiet house and planned my next moves. Sarah's reaction had confirmed my suspicions. She'd known about the potential inheritance and had factored it into her decision to leave. But she'd miscalculated, assuming she could have her cake and eat it too. Uncle Frank was going to be my first stop. It was time to have a family reunion. Frank's house in Levittown looked like every other ranch-style home on the block, except for the new Cadillac in the driveway and the recently installed swimming pool, visible through the chain-link fence. Not bad for someone supposedly living on Social Security. I rang the doorbell at 9 a.m. Sunday morning, knowing Frank would be home, reading his newspapers and drinking coffee. He answered the door in a bathrobe, his gray hair disheveled, squinting at me through thick glasses. David, what are you doing here so early? We need to talk, Uncle Frank, about Grandpa's will. His face went through several expressions in quick succession: surprise, confusion, and finally resignation. He stepped aside to let me in. The living room was furnished with expensive pieces that seemed out of place in the modest house. A 60-inch television dominated one wall, and I could see a high-end sound system in the corner. Through the sliding glass doors, the backyard featured professional landscaping and that new pool. Coffee? Frank asked, stalling for time. Sure. I followed him into the kitchen, noting the granite countertops and stainless steel appliances. Everything was top of the line, the kind of upgrades that cost serious money. Nice place you've got here, Frank. The pool's new, isn't it? He poured coffee into 2 mugs, his hands slightly shaky. Yeah, put it in last spring. Figured I deserved a little luxury in my golden years. Must have been expensive. I saved up. He handed me the mug and avoided eye contact. So, what's this about your grandfather's will? I found the real one, Frank. The one where he left everything to me. Frank sank into a kitchen chair, suddenly looking every one of his 73 years. David, I can explain. I'm sure you can. But first, tell me how much you've stolen from me over the past 15 years. Stolen? That's a harsh word, nephew. I've been managing your inheritance, keeping the business running, maintaining the properties. You think that's free? At $180,000 a year, plus bonuses? For a business that runs itself under Pete Kowalski's supervision? Frank's shoulders sagged. You found out about the salary. I found out about everything. The question is, are you going to make this easy or difficult? What do you want? I pulled out a legal document I'd had prepared by a lawyer in Mineola. I want you to sign over control of all assets to me immediately. I want a full accounting of every penny you've taken. And I want you to explain why my mother thought we were poor when she was receiving money from my inheritance. Frank read through the document slowly, his face growing paler with each page. Your mother didn't know, David. I told her the money was from my investments, that I was helping out family. She thought I was being generous. So you lied to her too. I was protecting her. And you! Do you have any idea what sudden wealth does to people? Look at lottery winners. Most of them are broke within 5 years. Your grandfather asked me to make sure you were mature enough to handle responsibility before turning everything over. Nonsense, Frank. Grandpa's letter says I should have been told when I turned 30. That was 8 years ago. Frank set down the document and looked at me with something like defiance. You were a mess at 30, David, struggling in your career, no direction in life. You think I should have handed over millions to someone who couldn't even hold down a steady job? That wasn't your decision to make. Your grandfather trusted me to use my judgment. My grandfather trusted you to follow his instructions. Instead, you decided to play God with my life. Frank was quiet for a long moment, staring into his coffee cup. What happens if I don't sign? Then I file criminal charges for embezzlement and fraud. I've already spoken to a prosecutor about the case. He's very interested in pursuing charges against someone who's been systematically stealing from a trust fund. You'd send your own uncle to prison? You stole my children's future, Frank. You're the reason Sarah left me. The reason I've been struggling to pay rent while you're installing swimming pools. So yeah, I'd absolutely send you to prison. Frank picked up a pen and signed the document without reading it again. There, are you happy now? I'm getting there. Now about that full accounting I mentioned. We spent the next 3 hours going through Frank's records, and the scope of his theft was staggering. Beyond his inflated salary, he'd been paying himself consulting fees, expense reimbursements for personal purchases, and had even used company funds to pay for his pool and landscaping. The money sent to my mother had been legitimate. Frank had been giving her $2,000 a month for years, telling her it was his way of helping family. She'd used it to supplement her pension, and had even set aside some of it in a savings account for David's future. The irony was bitter. What happens now? Frank asked as I prepared to leave. Now you get a job, a real one. The house is yours, but the gravy train is over. And Frank, yeah? If I find out you've been in contact with Sarah about any of this, if you've given her financial advice or inside information about my assets, I'll reconsider those criminal charges. Frank nodded miserably. I never meant for things to go this far, David. It just got easier to keep putting off the conversation. 15 years, Frank. You put off the conversation for 15 years while I struggled and my marriage fell apart. I left him sitting at his kitchen table, staring at his expensive appliances and probably calculating how he was going to afford the property taxes on his house without my money subsidizing his lifestyle. My phone rang as I drove back to Hicksville. Sarah's name appeared on the screen. David, we need to talk about the kids' school situation. Richard's already paid the tuition for the year at Whitmore Academy. That's generous of him. I'll reimburse Richard for half. Half? David, it's $50,000 per child. I know what it costs, Sarah. I also know that Richard claimed them as dependents on his tax return last year, which means he's getting a significant deduction. $50,000 each seems fair. There was a long pause. Where is this money coming from? Yesterday you were living in your mother's old house. I still am. I like it here. The kids seem to be adjusting well, too. The kids are staying with Richard and me during the school year. That was agreed upon. That was agreed upon when I couldn't afford to provide for them properly. Circumstances have changed. David, you can't just... Sarah, I'm not trying to disrupt their lives, but I am going to be a more present father, and I'm going to make sure they understand their options. Speaking of which, I'd like to take them to dinner tomorrow night, somewhere nice. Another pause. Fine, but have them back by 8. It's a school night. Of course. Oh, and Sarah, you might want to start thinking about your own future. Richard's prenup is pretty airtight according to public records. If things don't work out between you two, you're going to need a plan. I hung up before she could respond. It was time to reconnect with my children and start building the life I should have had all along. Taking Emma and Jake to dinner at Le Bernardin in Manhattan was probably overkill, but I wanted to make a point. Not to them. They were just kids who deserved good food and their father's attention. The point was for Sarah and Richard, who would inevitably hear about our evening from the children. Dad, this place is fancy, Emma whispered as the maitre d' led us to our table. She'd dressed up for the occasion, wearing a simple black dress that made her look older than her 14 years. It's just dinner, sweetheart. Good food and good company. Jake was less impressed by the ambiance than by the prices on the menu. Dad, the fish costs like $100. Don't worry about the prices tonight, buddy. Order whatever looks good. As we settled into our seats, I studied my children's faces, looking for signs of the confusion and divided loyalty they must be feeling. Emma had always been the more perceptive one, and I could see her trying to reconcile the father she'd known, the one who counted coupons and drove a 10-year-old Honda, with the man who could casually drop $300 on dinner without blinking. Dad, she said carefully, Mom said you came into some money. That's right. Turns out your great-grandfather left me some things that I didn't know about. Like what kind of things? A business, some properties, enough that I don't have to worry about money anymore. Jake looked up from his menu. Does that mean we can get a PlayStation 5? I laughed. I think that can be arranged. Emma was still processing. So, you were rich this whole time? No, sweetheart. I was supposed to be told about the inheritance when I turned 30, but some family members decided to keep it a secret. I just found out myself. That's messed up, she said, using the kind of language that would normally earn her a gentle correction. But she was right, so I let it slide. Yeah, it is pretty messed up. Our waiter appeared, a professional young man who treated my children with the same respect he'd show any adult diners. I ordered wine for myself and sparkling cider for Emma and Jake, along with appetizers that cost more than most people spend on groceries in a week. Dad, Jake said, does this mean you and Mom might get back together? The question hit me harder than I'd expected. I set down my wine glass and looked at both of my children, trying to find the right words. No, buddy, your mom and I aren't getting back together. She's married to Richard now, and that's not going to change just because my situation is different. But you have money now, Emma said. Isn't that why she left? Kids see things so clearly sometimes. Your mother left because she wasn't happy with our life together. Money might have been part of it, but there were other problems too. Like what? I considered how much truth 2 children could handle. Sometimes people grow apart. Your mother wanted things I couldn't give her, and I wanted things she couldn't give me. That's not anyone's fault. It's just what happened. Emma nodded solemnly. Richard's okay, I guess. But he's not you. He doesn't have to be me, Em. He just has to be good to you and your brother. Is he? Yeah, he is. He helped me with my math homework last week, and he took Jake to a Yankees game. Then I'm glad you have him in your life. The food arrived, and we spent the next hour talking about school, friends, and their plans for the future. Emma was interested in journalism, inspired by a teacher at her new school. Jake wanted to be a professional gamer, a career aspiration that would have worried me more if I hadn't just discovered I could afford to support his dreams indefinitely. There is one thing I want you both to understand, I said as we shared a dessert that was more art than food. You never have to choose between your parents. Your mom and I both love you, and we both want what's best for you. The fact that I have money now doesn't change that. But we could live with you if we wanted to, Emma asked. If that's what you really wanted, and if it's what's best for you, then yes. But I'm not going to pressure you to make that choice. You're doing well at your new school, you like living in the city, and Richard seems to be treating you well. Jake looked confused. So nothing's going to change? Some things will change. I'll be able to do more things with you, take you places, maybe travel together during vacations, but your day-to-day life doesn't have to be disrupted. On the drive back to Manhattan, Emma asked the question I'd been dreading. Are you mad at Mom? I considered lying, giving her a diplomatic answer that would preserve her relationship with her mother. But Emma was smart, and she deserved honesty. I'm disappointed in some of the choices your mother made, but I'm not going to put you in the middle of that. Whatever problems your mom and I have, they're between us. She's scared, Emma said quietly. Scared of what? That you're going to try to take us away from her. She's been crying a lot since yesterday. I felt a stab of something that might have been guilt, but I pushed it ahead. Sarah had made her choices based on what she thought was best for herself. Now she was dealing with the consequences. I'm not going to take you away from your mother, Em, but I'm going to be a bigger part of your lives from now on. I dropped them off at Richard's building on the Upper East Side, a gleaming tower that screamed wealth and status. The doorman knew them by name, and I could see the appeal of this life for two kids who'd grown up in a modest suburban home. Sarah was waiting in the lobby, looking elegant in a way that reminded me why I'd fallen in love with her 15 years ago. But there was tension in her posture, and her smile seemed forced. How was dinner? She asked the kids. Amazing, Jake said. Dad let me order lobster. That's nice. She looked at me over their heads. David, could we talk for a minute? I nodded, and she walked with me toward the building's entrance while the kids headed for the elevator. They don't need to be in the middle of this, she said quietly. I agree. That's why I'm not putting them there. Taking them to restaurants we could never afford, promising them things, that's not putting them in the middle? I took my children to dinner, Sarah. I'm not sure why that's a problem. She was quiet for a moment, watching the kids disappear into the elevator. Everything's different now. Yes, it is. I made my choices based on the information I had at the time. I know. And now I look like the villain in my own children's story. I almost felt sorry for her. Almost. You're not the villain, Sarah. But you're not the sufferer either. You left me because you thought Richard could give you a better life. That was your choice to make. And if I had known about your inheritance, would it have mattered? She didn't answer, which was answer enough. The kids are happy, I said. That's what matters now. But things are going to be different going forward. I hope we can work together to make sure the transition is smooth for them. What kind of transition? I'm going to be taking a more active role in their lives. More time together, more involvement in their decisions about school and activities. I'm not trying to undermine your relationship with them, but I'm not going to be a weekend father anymore. Sarah nodded slowly. And us? Richard and me? What about you? Are you going to try to destroy my marriage? The question surprised me with its directness. I'm not going to do anything to your marriage, Sarah, but I'm also not going to pretend that what you did was okay. You knew there might be money coming, and you positioned yourself to benefit from it while leaving me to struggle. That's between you and your conscience. I started to walk away, then turned back. Oh, and Sarah, you might want to be careful about how you handle this situation. Richard's not stupid, and he's starting to figure out that your interest in me wasn't entirely romantic. Men like him don't like being played. I left her standing in the lobby of her luxury building, probably wondering if her carefully constructed new life was about to come crashing down around her. It was time to start phase 2 of my plan. Richard called me the next morning, which I hadn't expected. His tone was businesslike, but not unfriendly. David, I was wondering if we could meet for lunch today, just the two of us. I suppose that would be fine. Where did you have in mind? There's a place called the Capitol Grill on East 42nd. 1 o'clock? I agreed, curious about what Richard wanted to discuss without Sarah present. The Capitol Grill was the kind of restaurant where business deals were made over expensive steaks, and I suspected this wasn't going to be a social lunch. Richard was already seated when I arrived, looking perfectly at home in the dark wood and leather atmosphere. He stood to shake my hand, and I noticed he'd chosen a corner table where our conversation wouldn't be overheard. "Thank you for meeting me," he said as we settled into our seats. "I thought it would be good for us to have a frank conversation about the situation." "What situation is that?" "Come on, David, we're both adults here. Your sudden financial windfall that has changed the dynamic significantly, and I think we need to establish some ground rules." The waiter appeared, and we both ordered. Richard the porterhouse, me the salmon. Richard also ordered a bottle of wine that probably cost more than most people's car payments. "What kind of ground rules?" I asked once we were alone again. "First, I want you to know that I genuinely care about Emma and Jake. Whatever happens between the adults, I don't want the children to be hurt." "I agree with that." "Second, I want to understand your intentions regarding Sarah." I leaned back in my chair, studying Richard's face. He was a successful businessman who'd built a fortune in real estate, but right now he looked like a man trying to protect something he wasn't sure he could hold on to. "I don't have any intentions regarding Sarah. She made her choice when she left me for you. But you're angry about the circumstances of that choice. Wouldn't you be?" Richard poured wine for both of us, taking his time with the ritual. "Probably, but anger can make people do stupid things, and I'd prefer to avoid any unnecessary drama." "What kind of drama are you worried about?" "The kind that ends up in the tabloids, the kind that affects my business relationships and social standing, the kind that traumatizes two children who've already been through enough upheaval." I had to admit, Richard was handling this better than I'd expected. He wasn't threatening me or trying to buy me off. He was appealing to my better nature while making it clear he understood the stakes. "I'm not planning to create any drama, Richard, but I'm also not going to pretend that everything's fine." "Fair enough. What do you want?" The question was so direct it caught me off guard. What do I want? From this situation? From Sarah? From me? What would it take for you to let sleeping dogs lie? I considered the question while the waiter delivered our meals. What did I want? Revenge? Justice? My old life back? "I want my children to know their father isn't a failure," I said finally. "I want them to understand that the reason we live modestly wasn't because I couldn't provide better, but because I didn't know I had the means to provide better." That seems reasonable. "I want Sarah to understand that her decision to leave me was based on incomplete information, and that actions have consequences." Richard cut into his steak, considering this. "And what consequences are you thinking about?" "I'm not sure yet." "David, can I give you some advice? Man to man?" I nodded. "Don't let your anger consume your judgment. Sarah made a choice based on what she knew at the time. Maybe it wasn't the most noble choice, but it wasn't entirely unreasonable either. You were struggling financially, I could offer stability, and she had to think about what was best for the children. Are you defending her decision to leave me? I'm defending her decision to marry me. There's a difference." I had to admit, Richard had a point. "What about the fact that she knew there might be family money coming eventually?" Richard was quiet for a moment. "She mentioned that your uncle had hinted at some future inheritance, but she also said he'd been vague about it for years. It sounded more like wishful thinking than actual financial planning." "So you're saying she didn't marry you for your money?" "I'm saying she married me for stability, security, and yes, financial comfort. But also because we genuinely care about each other. The money was a factor, but it wasn't the only factor." I found myself liking Richard despite everything. He was honest, straightforward, and seemed genuinely concerned about the children's welfare. Under different circumstances, we might have been friends. "What happens now?" I asked. "That depends on you. You could use your newfound wealth to wage war against us, drag everything through the courts, traumatize the kids, and probably destroy my marriage in the process. Or you could take the high road and focus on being the best father you can be with your new resources. And if I choose the high road, then we work together to give Emma and Jake the best possible life. You get to be the hero father who can afford anything they need. I get to be the stable stepfather who provides day-to-day support. And Sarah gets to be the mother who doesn't have to choose sides." It was a reasonable proposal, and a few days ago I might have accepted it. But Richard didn't understand the depth of my anger or the satisfaction I was getting from watching Sarah squirm. "I'll think about it," I said. "That's all I can ask." Richard signaled for the check. "One more thing, David. If you do decide to go to war, remember that I didn't steal anything from you. I fell in love with a woman who was available, and I married her. Whatever grievances you have, they're not with me." He was right, of course, but he was also collateral damage in a conflict he hadn't started. After lunch, I walked through Manhattan, thinking about Richard's proposal. The rational part of my mind knew he was right. The best thing for everyone, especially the children, would be to let bygones be bygones and focus on the future. But the rational part of my mind wasn't in control anymore. I pulled out my phone and called my lawyer. "Tom, it's David Patterson. I want to revisit the custody arrangement. What would it take to get primary custody of my children?" The custody hearing was scheduled for the following month, giving both sides time to prepare their cases. I'd hired Margaret Chen, one of the city's most aggressive family law attorneys, and she was confident we had a strong position. "Your financial situation has changed dramatically," she explained during our strategy session. "You can now provide everything the children need: private schools, college funds, extracurricular activities, travel opportunities. More importantly, you can provide stability and a full-time parent, not a stepfather." "What about their current living situation? They seem happy with Richard." "Happiness isn't the only factor courts consider. They look at the best interests of the children long term. A biological father with substantial means and flexible schedule beats a stepfather with money, especially when there are questions about the mother's motivations." Margaret was thorough, I'll give her that. She'd investigated every aspect of Sarah and Richard's life, looking for anything that might work in our favor. What she found was interesting, if not entirely surprising. "Richard's been married twice before," she reported. "Both wives were significantly younger. Both marriages ended in expensive divorces. There's a pattern here that we can exploit." "What kind of pattern?" "He marries younger women, enjoys them for a few years, then trades them in for newer models. The prenup Sarah signed is ironclad. If they divorce, she gets almost nothing." "How do you know about the prenup?" Margaret smiled. "Richard's previous wives had the same lawyer. He was happy to share the template." This information should have made me feel vindicated, but instead it just made me sad. Sarah had thought she was trading up to security, but she'd actually put herself in a more precarious position than she'd been in with me. "There's something else," Margaret continued. "Emma's been talking to her school counselor about the situation at home. Apparently, Sarah and Richard have been arguing frequently since your financial situation became known." "About what?" "About you, about the children, about their future together. Emma's smart enough to understand that her mother's marriage might be in trouble." I thought about Emma's perceptive comment at dinner. "She's scared." Sarah had reason to be scared. Her carefully constructed new life was cracking at the foundation. "What's our timeline?" I asked. "The hearing is in 3 weeks. But David, I have to ask, are you sure this is what you want? Custody battles are brutal, especially on children. Emma and Jake are going to be caught in the middle of this." I'd been asking myself the same question for days. Was I doing this for the children's benefit, or was I doing it to punish Sarah? The honest answer was probably both. "I want my children back," I said, "whatever it takes." That evening, Sarah called me. Her voice was strained, and I could hear the exhaustion in it. "David, we need to talk. Can you come over? To Richard's place? He's not here. He's in Chicago on business. Please, just come over. We need to figure this out before it gets any worse." I took a cab to the Upper East Side, and Sarah met me in the lobby. She looked terrible. Her usually perfect hair was pulled back in a messy ponytail. She wasn't wearing makeup, and her clothes looked like she'd slept in them. "The kids are at a friend's house," she said as we rode the elevator to the penthouse. "I thought we should talk privately." The apartment was even more impressive than I'd imagined. Floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking Central Park, furniture that belonged in a museum, and artwork that probably cost more than most people's houses. But it felt cold, like a showroom rather than a home. "Drink?" Sarah asked, heading for a bar that was better stocked than most restaurants. "Sure." She poured 2 glasses of expensive scotch and handed me one. Her hand was shaking slightly. "So," she said, settling into a chair across from me, "you're really going to try to take the kids?" "I'm going to try to get primary custody, yes." "Why? They're happy here. They like their school, they have friends, they have stability. They have a stepfather who's going to trade you in for a younger model within the next few years, leaving them in the middle of another divorce." Sarah's face crumpled. "You know about Richard's pattern." "I know about a lot of things now, Sarah." including the fact that your prenup leaves you with almost nothing if the marriage ends. I thought I was being smart, she whispered. I thought I was giving the kids a better life. You were thinking about giving yourself a better life. The kids were just part of the package. Sarah finished her scotch in one gulp and poured another. You want to know the truth, David? The whole truth? I'm listening. Frank did tell me about the potential inheritance. Not the details, but enough to know that you might come into money someday. And yes, that was part of my calculation when I decided to leave. I figured as much. But it wasn't the only part. We were struggling, David, really struggling. The kids needed things we couldn't afford. And I was tired of counting every penny, of saying no to opportunities because we didn't have the money. So you found someone who did have the money. I found someone who could give us stability. Richard isn't perfect, but he's been good to the kids. He cares about them. Until he doesn't. Sarah was crying now, mascara running down her cheeks. I know I made mistakes. I know I hurt you. But please don't punish the children for my choices. I'm not punishing them. I'm trying to give them what they deserve. A parent who puts their needs first. And you think I don't? I think you put your own needs first and convinced yourself it was for their benefit. Sarah set down her glass and looked at me with something like desperation. What do you want, David? What would it take for you to drop the custody suit? I want my children back. What else? There has to be something else. I studied her face, seeing the woman I'd once loved reduced to this desperate, broken person. Part of me wanted to comfort her, to tell her everything would be okay. But a larger part of me wanted to watch her suffer the way I'd suffered. I want you to admit what you did, I said finally. To the kids, to Richard, to yourself. I want you to own the fact that you left me for money and security, not love. And if I do that, then maybe we can work out a custody arrangement that doesn't require a court battle. Sarah was quiet for a long time, staring out the window at the city lights. Richard already knows, she said finally. We had a fight about it last night. He accused me of marrying him under false pretenses, of using him as a placeholder until your money came through. What did you tell him? I told him he was wrong, but I don't think he believed me. Was he wrong? Sarah didn't answer, which was answer enough. The kids don't deserve this, she said. Whatever mistakes I made, they don't deserve to be torn apart by a custody battle. Then don't fight me on this. I can't just give up my children, David. Whatever else I've done, I love them. I'm not asking you to give them up. I'm asking you to do what's best for them. And you think living with you is what's best? I think living with their biological father, who can provide for them and who isn't going through a messy divorce, is what's best. Sarah flinched at the reference to her marital problems. Richard and I are working things out. Are you? Because from what I hear, he's been spending a lot of time in Chicago lately, and Miami, and Los Angeles, anywhere but here with his wife and stepchildren. He's building a business. He's building an exit strategy. Sarah poured herself another drink, and I realized she was already well on her way to being drunk. You want to know something funny? I actually thought I was being noble, leaving you. I thought I was freeing you from the burden of supporting us, giving you a chance to find someone who wouldn't drain your resources. Very noble. Don't be sarcastic, David. I'm trying to explain. Then explain. I thought you'd be happier without us. Without the constant worry about money, without the pressure of providing for a family you couldn't afford. I thought we'd both be better off. And now? Now I realized I was just making excuses for what I wanted to do anyway. It was the closest thing to an apology I was likely to get from Sarah, and part of me appreciated the honesty, but it was too little, too late. The custody hearing is in 3 weeks, I said, standing to leave. You can fight me if you want, but we both know how it's going to end. I have the resources now to give Emma and Jake everything they need, and you have a marriage that's falling apart. David, please, think about what's best for the kids, Sarah. For once in this whole mess, think about what's actually best for them. I left her sitting in that cold, beautiful apartment, surrounded by luxury that was about to disappear. And I felt something I hadn't expected to feel. I felt sorry for her, but not sorry enough to change my mind at the end.